So today we are going to be talking about POI, or person of interest data, coming available in Salesforce soon. And as I say that, coming available soon. I don't want to dive way deep into this topic because that's not happening right now. And so there will be some change management. We'll talk about from a high level what that will look like for you all, but I don't want to distract with that. This is more until we get to that stage. There is something that you might be able to do within your reports to make that transition, whenever that time comes, a little bit easier. So essentially, any reports that might be impacted by this change that you're going to create from now until when we make this change, we just have a quick tip for you, and I think you all pick it up pretty quick. But hopefully that will set us all up for success and less change when we actually make that leap, and it won't cause mass amounts of confusion. But we'll see how it goes. With all that, as always, informal session, please unmute, put in chat as you have questions. If we do need to end up diving in way deeper, that's perfectly fine. And I'm happy to do that with some folks who want to stay on the line, and others can go ahead and drop off. So POI data, again, person of interest, is really hard to describe. Daniela, I don't know if you would agree with this. I ended up settling on non-traditional close affiliation with CU because it runs the spectrum. And so here were just some examples I called out, and typo here, I will fix that later. But affiliates, again, what does that mean? But folks in a pre-employment stage, security, which is like, if in myself being in this IT shop, we have a lot of folks with vendors who need to log into our tools, and they need to have a security role as a POI. Volunteers, underneath that, I called out clinical volunteers, student athletes, regents, as well as former regents. And so there is a link on here. My apologies for not sharing out yet. This wiki. But there's also a link that Employee Services has provided that's just a lot more detail on those different categories, the short description, and the usage of them as well. But I want to go ahead and pause there for folks, because why are we doing this? Because y'all asked for it. So I want to ask a little question right now. Who is excited to use this data, and are there any particular of these like short descriptions or descriptions that you're particularly interested in?
Hey, Mel.
Yeah.
Can you define how you're describing affiliates?
Yes. So I guess that's where the reason I chose affiliates is because there are a couple different descriptions of this. That's the best I got. Does anyone else have a better idea of what an affiliate is?
I was kind of guessing that maybe, like, for instance, we have a website vendor and they had to do person of interest, fill out form and all that stuff. I don't know if it's connected to what you're going over today, but I would think they would fall under affiliate or security, maybe. I don't know. No, maybe.
As you said that, like, Danielle, I don't know if you know the term we use in IT. We have similar use cases, or like sometimes people need training. So they need access to log into our tools, and the POI is kind of the workaround to be like, oh, you can get access to our tools, but we need to treat you like a real employee, and you need to log into your email and do Skillsoft courses and all that.
Okay.
So I don't have a solid answer on that. Sorry.
Okay, no, I was just going to say their purpose is basically, while we're down development staff, they help keep our security updates flowing, our maintenance, any bug issues with the website, and they did POI back in the fall.
Do you want to communicate with those individuals via Marketing Cloud?
No, probably not. I don't think it's necessary. Not at this Yeah.
I think there's some cases that we have where it's, oh no, they don't need that, but there's others where no, they are heavily involved in work year over year that we would want them on our digest or something, and this would make it possible.
Okay. Yeah, in the future, I totally see a case for it, just not currently. When we do more integrations and that sort of a thing.
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks.
Not to put you on the spot too much, but Ann Shoots, is this something that you're planning on using?
Yes, absolutely. There are a few use cases, mostly folks who have some affiliation with the university but are employed by the hospitals. And so there's a lot of those folks who there'll be like one or two in a department that just tend to not pull into our normal list. And so I could definitely see a use case for those folks.
And Sravant, I'm not recalling if this was during your time at Boulder or not. But I almost think it bubbled up when Jess was still here when COVID, oh, those fun communications she was so heavily involved in. And a lot of people are coming out like, I don't know what's going on the campus. And it's when we realized, oh, there's a lot of POIs, people who do have an interest in what's going on the campus who we're not getting real-time data in Salesforce for. And so that brought light to a very large gap here.
So I don't know, I remember something about this when I first joined Boulder, but I wasn't really involved in those meetings and whatnot at that point. And I personally have not used POI data for reporting. So yeah, that's where I am.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think there's going to be, as we saw with Jason, like there's some cases where people are like, oh yes, I absolutely want to include these individuals. And so with the way that this data is ultimately going to be added by default, it's kind of they're included. And so even if you don't want to include them, there is going to be some steps later on in updating your reports to make sure that you're not sending data to those POI individuals. You would see large jumps in your audience counts and maybe a lot of questions like, why am I getting this email? So we'll want to avoid opening that can of worms unnecessarily. There is a screenshot in here of a POI record, and you guys don't have access to this in Salesforce right now. I blurred out some of the data like on the contact, but otherwise, this is where we're seeing like that description and such. But it also, you'll see in some cases, some of these fields, and Daniela, before I butcher this, if you would like to step in, some of these fields overlap with the data that we have on typical employees, but just based on our, I guess, looser affiliation to these individuals, it's definitely not as rich as a typical employee's record.
Yep. Yeah, that's a great way of putting it, Mel. It's almost like a bared down employee record. And really the ones that are specific are POI type description, and then end date, since I think pretty much all POIs always have an end date with their record too. Everything else overlaps with the regular employment records we're used to.
Let's call it that action field. So if they're not in there anymore, most of us are using those in our reports, they'll get excluded. That's ever a D. So timeline wise, again, in the future, this project is dependent on other projects that are going on. So we don't want to just, I don't hear everyone having a lot of extra time these days. So we'll want to think about our geocode sunsetting project, which should conclude around May 1st. All those report updates that should occur, which were pretty minor, but Also keep in mind with this business unit and preference optimization project that's going on. I know we've been meeting with you all to discuss to finalize what those changes will be. And Claire and Daniela will start putting those changes into action, but there's going to be a time frame of changing, where once Claire and Daniela do all their work to changing the preferences, that's going to roll down to reports needing to be updated and cleaned up, as well as data extensions. So that'll probably happen in the May-June timeframe. So I don't know if it makes sense rolling out POI data until later on, potentially into July. I'm going to pause there. Does anyone have any great concerns with that time frame and just not doing 2 projects at once? Happy day. And that is something we're all going to need to be on the same page when we roll this out. There's no, oh, Jason wants it, he can have it, everyone else can hold off. We'll need to be united on that. So when it does become available in Salesforce, as I mentioned earlier, you'll need to update reports relying on employment data, depending on your use case. So you'll have to decide, do I want this audience to capture POIs or not? And so failure, or the biggest risk around not updating a report, is that you could end up sending a message to a much broader audience, meaning including POIs, by accident. And while not as risky, if you don't update reports, you could also be in a place where you're missing the opportunity to communicate to POIs, or even doing manual work to communicate to POIs. So be sure to seize that opportunity if it's of value to you. Our affected reports, again, are based around employment data, where the most granular filter you're using is just like, hey, send to this campus or send to this department. In those cases, it could absolutely start encompassing POIs. If you are targeting far more granular, like individuals in a particular campaign, and overlapping employment data, or honing in on a specific job group code or like a group of titles, that specific filter that you're adding is automatically not going to include POIs. So there's a little bit of nuance to it, and we'll definitely get more into this, obviously, as you all need to determine how to update these reports accordingly. And all those nuances do make it pretty difficult for us to even establish at this point how many reports we'll need to edit, but we're thinking it's about 1,500, and haven't figured out how that's divvied up among the campuses either. So lots more to come there. Shribant?
Hey, Mel, quick question on this subject. So just to give you an example of how some of our employment reports are set up. So what we do is when we build these filter-based reports for employment, we exclude some codes and titles, as opposed to including a bunch of job group codes or titles. We exclude them. So what I'm understanding from what you just said is that when this change does happen, we need to be sure to include the code for POIs in the exclusion. Is that correct?
Daniela, do you have a clear answer on that?
Yeah, yours is a little different. If you don't want to include POIs, then yes, you should include the specific POI type numbers in your exclusion filter. If you do want to include them, you don't have to do anything differently.
Okay, got it.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So when that time comes, and we kind of already ran through, will help y'all, again, this won't be till July, but we'll help you identify which reports are using employment data. We'll figure out how to hone in on those that are actually impacted, given all those fun nuances. But once we do a couple, I think we'll all pick it up pretty quickly. You all will be integral, and you might even have to involve your users in identifying, is this a report that should include POIs or not? There's a value add. And then we'll all have to update reports, and we haven't determined who that's on yet, but if that's something that once you all identify it, if our team can help do that and turn it around quickly, we're happy to. So like we've said, POI data will automatically be included. And although unnecessary, you could do your filter logic to include record types of POI employment as well as official CU employment, but again, unnecessary. But in these cases where we want to exclude POIs, and so this is, I know I said I didn't want to get too far into the changes that will come in July, and I did. But this last change is also what we'll want you to be mindful of if you are creating reports based off employment data from now until we make this change, like July. So again, with the thought, if you're creating a report and it you want it to include POIs, you probably don't really need to worry about it or do anything different than what you're doing. But if you know you want to exclude them, what we recommend is adding this employment record type filter to your criteria, and make sure you only select in it official CU employment. So right now you could check POI employment as well, and it wouldn't actually change the data in your report. But again, the second we push that data, if that POI employment was checked, your list is going to go up exponentially. So again, you're creating a report based on employment, you know you want to exclude POIs in the future, add this filter and set it to only official CU employment and make sure that's applied. And that will mitigate the need of updating those reports when we do make this change. All right, so as we approach these other timelines, we will provide more trainings, go through all of those steps that I talk through, but not until things are closed up for our other two projects.